The limits to the yield of the design are only limited by the imagination of the designer. So the potential for yield is very high, and the main thing that we want is to always have new eyes and ears coming into our designs to give us suggestions about what could we add where, what else could we be doing here. Because you may think that you've come up with an exhaustive set of ideas of what you could be doing, and then somebody else comes onto your site and they notice things that you never noticed because it's so close to you. So that's an important part of recognizing that we're limited by our information and imagination, is that we definitely want to make sure that we're tapping other human beings for information and imagination. But that's a key part of really having an expansive design that continues to grow and be improved upon and have new elements introduced into it. Work with and not against nature. So looking at when we're seeing an event happen in our garden, figure out what's the cycle of that disease or of that pest or of that die-off event that's happening, so that then we can learn where to intervene properly in the life cycle of either the pest or the disease. So do our homework into those cycles. Everything gardens, everything has a cumulative effect on the environment. So the idea here is that all life is creating various energies and resources and nutrients in its environment, and is creating oftentimes habitat for other life. And the idea is for us as a species to begin to set up habitats that are beneficial for all kinds of life. And that the more that humans participate in this same activity that in the main is what organisms and biological life is doing in ecosystems, that human beings need to begin to participate in the cooperative evolution of Earth ecosystems. And by doing that, by creating these gardens, we create these effects in our environment with each element that we bring into the garden. So everything's gardening, everything's creating niches, everything's creating pockets of opportunities for other life forms. So the notion here is, let's be intentional about creating arranged relationships between these behaviors, between the way in which these plants and these animals interact. Care for the earth, care for the people, and care for the community. That's our key ethic, and that's that underlying fact that care of the earth is essential in order for people to be healthy, and then from there we can begin to heal communities. But first we need to heal the earth in order to heal ourselves. Because the notion here is that we could really bump our heads up against trying to do a ton of well-intended social work. Meanwhile, the people who we're working with may be drinking polluted water, have really bad diets, and are living in a place that has lots of air pollution. So if we're trying to do positive social work when people are actually being contaminated by all these various pollutants, then they can't function at a particularly high level. And so you'll get frustrated trying to heal the wounds of an age where people aren't going to be able to heal if they're constantly being inundated with contaminated air, contaminated water, and really crappy diets and food. So you start from the ground up. Make sure that people are starting to have better water, better air, better diets. That's what we're saying at a holistic level. We need to be aware as people who are interested in healing that some of our healing efforts will be more well spent if we apply them to the whole system, rather than trying to focus on one demographic or one specific constituency, to think about the context of that constituency. We live on an abundant earth, maximize ecological production, and distribute the surplus. So that's a baseline assumption and an attitude. We live on an abundant earth. The earth is abundant. The earth is prolific in its ability to provide abundance. Now let's be intentional about how we direct that abundant energy to make life that much more enjoyable and easier for us by bringing back the cultivated diversity into our landscapes. All those 4,000 varieties of plants that I mentioned that have been domesticated, several thousand varieties of animals that have been domesticated, to start to bring back that cultivated diversity into our landscapes is part of how we make life easier for ourselves and bring this sense of abundance back into proximity. And then everything has intrinsic worth. So this is a basic underlying philosophical position from which we come as designers, is that everything has intrinsic worth, and I need to come from a place of humility when I'm working with life, when I'm working with the earth, when I'm working with this incredible responsibility that we've been handed of 4.5 billion years of evolution. and being intentional with that responsibility, recognizing that there's an incredible meaning that's inherent in all things that we're not creating, that things are just inherently meaningful, inherently important, inherently of huge worth that's beyond my ability to comprehend as a human being. That I'm humble to that and wanting to acknowledge that this world is a very miraculous, complex phenomenon, and I want to appreciate that miraculousness rather than entering into it from a place of presumptuousness. Coming from what Taoism talks about as a sense of childlike wonder or awe, to keep that sense of energy alive as well. Because that's a key part of what taps us into that intrinsic worth, or what we call these also subtle energetics that we notice as we walk a site. So designers, permaculture designers pay a lot of attention to the empirical data. We also recognize that there's an invaluable dimension to what makes good design that has to do with recognizing the intrinsic worth of all things and recognizing that we need to be in a place and notice things that we can't identify with maps and with aerial photos, that we'll just sense in that place. So there's these unspoken intrinsic essences that we acknowledge and are tuning into as a key part of good design. Is observation and site analysis would be another way to say that, that's a little less inspirational perhaps. Those are also key parts of the notion that everything has intrinsic worth. And then everything works both ways. Disadvantages can be resources and vice versa. So looking at that dynamic, that there's oftentimes a perceptual shift or even just a flip in how a behavior is happening that turns something that initially is a negative characteristic into a positive characteristic. Oh, we're producing a ton of vegetable scraps here. What are we going to do with this? i.e., you begin building a lot of soil. Oh, we're right now shipping 40% of the waste out of New York City with tractor trailers. What are we going to do with this? Well, that 40% of it could be composted. So looking at how everything works both ways. So something that right now is creating a ton of pollution and a ton of shipping energy and a lot more space in our landfills could quickly become helping us bioremediate, stopping as much trucking traffic and diminishing how much stuff is ending up in our landfills.